So my next question is perhaps maybe related to perhaps my industry, music industry. I'm very curious to know how musicians or workers in our industry can perhaps improve the system, because I had some conversations with many people recently, and we all agree that somehow the system of, for example, my music world, I guess it applied to performing arts world in general. We really have to rethink about our maybe monetary value, because in some way I think artists, we really pay too much attention solely on perhaps the social and artistic value, because this is how we were trained. But somehow, in terms of a sort of like a with a community, not just for individual high-paid artists or high-paid groups of ensemble, music ensemble, but in general, people don't really have a very secured base pay, if we use your term. And this is something that I find a little bit frustrating, because yesterday I was talking with a friend, and we were trying to determine if music is non-rivalrous or rivalrous goods. And apparently, on the surface level, I think it is more likely to be viewed as non-rivalrous, which means this sort of property can be used or can be consumed in public for everyone. But somehow, I guess, because this is, art is so subjective, so abstract, and also we have the limitation of space. So for live concerts, obviously, it is very hard for everyone, in the world to be able to enjoy the work, because it only happened once, right? So I was just kind of fascinated by the fact that, yes, it has so much different sort of elements, and because of how people perceive art differently, we were perhaps, as a community, we were probably valued more sort of based on the kind of the entertainment sort of value, if you understand me. I don't know how to, it's the monetary value sort of based on the performance itself. So each performance was paid once, right?
Right.
Instead of sort of like the art has a kind of a timeless value, which probably is very different from perhaps like other fields, such as, maybe for researchers such as you, who actually, your work can be easily accessed by everyone. And your work is, yes, it is very meaningful and significant, but it's also not something that people can sort of understand right away, or sort of, doesn't have a direct impact immediately. And I think this is something that I feel like maybe, I don't know what can be done, but I do think if we can maybe see music more with multiple functions, not just for entertainment, but it also has like intellectual property value. And in my opinion, I feel like if we can get more support from maybe can be government, or can be certain like public organizations or foundations, that would be actually really great, and has more maybe better, let's say, or kind of sort of equality among musicians. Otherwise, everything goes to the top, like most of industries, right?
Yeah. I think, like the observation that everything goes to the top probably has just been exacerbated in the past like 20 years or so. I think partly it's It's like due to the technology and stuff like that, right? So when I think about music industry, I think if it's like 100 years ago, there's no way, you can just, it's just like traveling from one place to the other place is just much more difficult. So as a result, probably, you have to have some kind of local orchestra to keep them there and perform, right? Otherwise, maybe people will never be able to see a live concert. And plus, back then, it's also, you get like this radio, which is very noisy, and it's, the ability to enjoy music is probably much less than what we have today. Today I can just go to YouTube and I can like basically I do this all the time, right? I would just search like Tchaikovsky, whatever, and I would listen, put it on the background. I'll do my coding and then I listen to like Tchaikovsky, whatever, Beethoven, whatever, right? So like I can enjoy a lot of music without having to pay much, just using the internet.
Free. It's completely free on YouTube.
So on YouTube, I think you have to watch some advertisement and stuff like that. So I think like the person whoever owns the property, who owns the intellectual rights, who uploaded that video probably will receive some kind of uh, advertise spending, because whenever they make an advertisement, they give some share to the person who posted the video. So probably they receive some of that, but it's probably not nearly enough to make it work.
You're talking about people who already probably have substantial amount of followers. Then obviously they can use that as a way to actually make a living, maybe not even make a living, but receive a tiny portion of some sort of reward.
Right. So I think it's like I think the partly it's like attributable to the technology, to like both the transportation technology as well as the internet, right? Like it makes it makes the good product much more scalable. So think about it, like I can listen to Berliner like basically on YouTube, right? I've only been to one Berliner concert for my whole life, and it's really amazing. But whenever I don't want to pay, I can at least, go to the YouTube and listen to whatever they play, and it's really amazing, right? Maybe it's not, I mean, it's definitely not as good as going to Carnegie Hall and listen to the whole concert, but you do get a lot of this enjoyment value out there. So in the past, this is not possible. I mean, at least let's say 100 years ago, this is not possible, right? And probably 50 years ago, this is possible, but then like, the quality is lower. So like think about these two products as substitutes, right? One is going to a live concert. The other is listening through other media, for example, through the TV or radio, or buy a CD, something like that, right? So these two are competing goods. So I think I would argue that the quality of the live concert does not necessarily go up over time, because like it's this you would have a grandmaster, maybe like Horowitz playing, or right, like 50 years ago. You do not necessarily have a Horowitz today, right? Maybe you will have someone who is nearly as good, but it's like I would argue that the value of live concert do not really go up as time passes. But I would argue that the enjoyment through other media has definitely gone up, because you have much better way to much easier to download music, much easier way to just load the music on through the internet. So like between these two substitutable goods, people probably are becoming less willing to pay for a live concert, relative to just going to the internet and just enjoy whatever music they like, right?
Exactly. And this is something that I actually have been worried about. I had a similar sort of thought, relating to actually what is going on with the pandemic. Obviously, we cannot really have live performances. As a result, many artists, performing artists, start to upload lots of homemade videos on internet. I think for social value, it is really remarkable, because it does give people some comfort. On the other hand, I do worry by overly indulging, this sort of let's say interaction with your audience or future audience, we probably unconsciously are actually, changing the model way too soon, because, I'm not saying that technology is always, sort of harmful for art performances. Um, However, I don't think under this circumstance, artists are prepared for the change, because you need to have very good training and also awareness, financial awareness, I would say, to know how you can present concerts and how you can actually, uh, make a living out of that. Now, by just sort of like, I would say, relying on social media and internet to gain some kind of support or recognition is, um, perhaps,
I think maybe counterproductive.
probably, yeah, it may be counterproductive, because your goal is to have people coming coming back to live performances.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I agree. Like, I think, I think my premise is that, whatever you see over the internet is not going to be comparable, at least not going to be entirely substitutable for a live concert, right? So I've done both. I've gone to many live concerts while I was at Bard, as you know. And I've been to Carnegie a few times ever since I relocated here to New York City. So live concert has its own charm, right? Has its own, it's like entirely different. You invited me to one of your concerts, and it was really amazing. I'm really glad that you did, because sitting in that concert hall and listening to, so the feeling is very different, right? So when you're facing the computer, you're paying attention to a lot of different things. And also the sound is basically coming from like your speaker, right? Like, whereas if you're sitting in a music hall, like, you have this all surrounding experience where the music just surrounds you, and you basically have very little room to think about. I mean, you still think about other things, but overall you're immersed in music. So I think that's not substitutable. So my understanding is, I feel these are not necessarily going to harm, like, it's not going to stop people from going back to concert halls. I hope what's going to happen is that through this kind of, I would call this outreach. So because of this outreach, hopefully more people will get interested in classic music, right? Hopefully more people will be eventually starting to buy tickets, going to Carnegie Hall, going to, Lincoln Center, and, like, going to these live concerts. Because, like, I mean, frankly, I think most people, if they really want to enjoy music, they don't have to listen to these, online concert, really, because like the recording quality may not necessarily be the first rate, and also, like, those pieces probably have been played like 1,000 times, and you can just search on YouTube. Probably one of these you know masters have played it like 50 years before, right? So I would say, I'm less worried about these kind of activities stopping people going back to concert, but I do hope that the positive, so other than, making people a little bit more happier during the pandemic, but what I really hope is that it starts to attract more people going to concert hall. I think it's actually very necessary, because I feel the number of people who are interested in the classic music is probably dwindling. I would think the number is probably decreasing as the generation, at the next generation, um, and so how to pull them back, right? Like, how to get more fans. Like, most young people will know who Taylor Swift is, right? Very few will know who Horowitz is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, there has to be something has to be done on the part of the musicians. So, okay, this is my opinion. You can tell me what you think, right? So I think a lot of classic musicians, you have like this idea of like purity or like if you would like to say it's like artistic value, right? Like you want to perform pieces that are serious, that are, like you think is a great piece, right? You're unwilling, most of the classic musicians are perhaps less willing to, play some more, I would say, down to earth kind of things, like, like some crossover with jazz or pop arts and whatever, like pop music.
I think the younger generation have much more open-mindedness, and people are starting to be, collaborating with, jazz musicians or folk musicians. It's actually more common now.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good thing because, like I think a lot of younger people, they know, they know what is, like all these pop musicians, right? They know all these stars, but they know very little about this classic music genre. So by collaboration, hopefully, for example, I know that Lang Lang is doing a lot of these, right? I mean, you may not, you depending on how you think about it, but I think it's still a good outreach to hopefully letting people to look up who Lang Lang is, and also maybe look up his recording, not just his performance on one of these pop music concerts, right? So he has played a lot of, at least in my opinion, I like some of his recordings and I like some of his performances, and I think it's good to do these kind of outreach, and hopefully at least we need to expand the audience. I think that's what's really needs to be done at the moment.
One thing is to expand the audience. The other thing is how to maybe have a, slightly more kind of how do you call it in an economical way, financial term. Maybe maybe a better kind of base pay system.
Yeah, so I think that's also a reasonable, that's also something that needs to be considered, right? Because everyone needs to make a living wage, right? Like although some of them are like they some of the musicians they're willing to sacrifice a lot just to be able to stay in the music world, but you have to make sure that you have food on the table, right? So I think one thing I thought about was, I think there are two things I thought about. I think the government subsidy. Let me talk about the government subsidy later. Okay. So I think the first thing that let me first get out of the way is that I think the nice thing about classic musicians is that you guys already have a lot of you guys are very successful in reaching out to a lot of donors and foundations, and they seem to recognize the value of having classic musicians, good classic music around. I think to some extent, it's one way to perpetuate the culture and memory of the country, right? Because a lot of these culture and memory is stored in music. So I think people do, private or publicly, people do recognize this kind of value. That's why they are willing to give a lot of money to musicians, to music performances, as well as like to sponsor young musicians like you, right? And so I think that's one thing that you guys are already doing really well. I think there are other things that potentially can be done, right? One thing is, like as you said, at the moment it seems like only the most successful musicians have the financial payoff, while most of the other musicians do not, right? I think that's the same thing in a lot of world where where the things are less tangible, right? If you're a banker, you have your tangible value, and your pay is going to be different, but I guess like the lowest paid banker is still going to make a living wage, probably much higher than that, right? While the musician is probably much less so, I would say. So I guess one thing I thought about is like maybe start some kind of like really binding professional organization. So one analogy that I thought about was like in tennis, right? You have this ATP and stuff like that. So I think like always some of the money will go to like the lower ranked player as long as they attend these tournaments and stuff like that. But I think that may not be sufficient, and it may not work in the music world because I think in tennis, my understanding is that you do need to keep like X number of people in this world so that they can have a professional matchup, right? Otherwise, Otherwise, you can't just be Federer and the Djokovic playing against each other all the time, or including Nadal, right? So you can't have like you can't only keep 10 people, 10 best people around and just play with each other. That's not so much fun. You can't have like a long season out of those kind of matches. So they probably need to use some kind of incentive to keep other slightly lower ranked people still professional around. But in music world, I don't necessarily see there is such an incentive, right? Because for example, if you have 10 great orchestras in the world, right? I think that will be quite sufficient because they can just have concert in different city. They can fly back and forth. They can have their concerts and stuff like that, right? And then you can maybe have like a few local ones who occasionally put up a performance. So I don't necessarily know if that's going to work. And what is the incentive of, for example, for a very successful musician like Lan Lan or like Hilary Hahn to be part of this world other than being purely altruistic, right? Because they would have to essentially transfer some of their earned income to other musicians, right? So that's, I guess, one thing that's a possibility, but I don't see how that can actually be realized. Yeah, right. I don't think I don't think you can see that either, right?
No.
Yeah, but I think the other thing that musician may be able to do is more specialization. It's not everyone playing all the same pieces. I think maybe you can have some musicians or smaller group of people focusing on a specific area, which will have their specific audience, right?
Right.
So one example I thought about was like maybe 10 years ago, 2008, so more than 10 years ago. So I was doing an intern here in New York City, and my boss gave me a ticket to go to this concert. So I think it's in near the Met Museum, but it's in a really nice room, not full of people. I think was like less than 100 for sure. And they're doing like ancient, I don't know, you definitely know it, but I don't know the English name. It's like ancient piano, whatever. Like it's not like the modern piano. Baroque piano, I think. Something like that, right? So they still have a fan following, and they still have like people who are willing to pay for these kind of concerts. And you don't have to compete with, Lan Lan or.
It's very smart. I mean, I don't think people would think like that way because again, we focus so much on, the artistic value rather than maybe, put, us individual players among, the whole group. And you actually have a point because I guess we are also well trained, and most of us I think it is important for the education part, right? To cover everything, to cover different kind of styles. That's really good, but maybe you have a point. If every single artist can cultivate their, let's so-called unique characteristic. It can be, repertoire choice or it can be your style choice, whatever that is. But try to find what makes you different from the other.
Right.
And, you'll attract specific type of audience who would come to your performance, right?
Yeah, I think
very interesting because I mean, again, it's like this term. I was talking this with a friend. Like again, going back to the term, if music is like non-rivalrous or rivalrous. So if you actually go to a concert where the performer actually has a very special and unique quality, then that specific performance becomes like rivalrous because people can only enjoy right there once. But if a performer is sort of like has equal sort of skill or equal kind of execution like many other musicians, then it becomes sort of not really that sort of value sort of changed.
right.
People can go to this one or can to go to the other one. They don't have to go to that specific performer's concert.
Right. Just like, you don't, like, for example, if you want to you know, if you want to play Chopin, I'm sure there are 100, 200 people who can play Chopin very, very well, right? But what about these more modern artists who have like very nice pieces and, you know, they need to be heard and they need to be interpreted, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So maybe like you know, because the analogy I thought was like with the pop music, right? So
Yeah.
for pop music, basically everyone has their own unique set of songs, right? They sing their own songs. That's what make them unique. Like no, so other people can sing their song, but it's not from this guy or her, but not from him or her, right? So in classic music, I guess you can develop something like that, you know. So everyone has their own signature of some sort, and then like so you don't have to always compete with Hillary Hahn, right? Like you don't. So that would be tough.
Oh, that's the other issue. But I do feel this sort of what you said was that, you know, for pop musicians, obviously, you know, they have completely different repertoire from each other, and for, you know, classic musicians, um, our job, let's say, most of us, unless you're a composer slash performer, but I guess most of modern classically trained musicians, we focus on performances, right? So
Right.
then, as a result, we sort of only use maybe not similar, but sort of like you know, repertoire from the same category, and
Right.
you know, we all sort of interpreted the same thing. We can have our own different interpretation, and that sets us apart from, you know, other musicians. Uh,
But
yet,
but
I guess, yeah.
yeah, but you know the thing is like you guys something that may sound very different in your you know from your perspective may not sound so different from the broader audience perspective, right? So like you know if I'm just a music lover, it would be difficult for me to tell the you know the small differences between two kinds of interpretation. Uh, but you know like so that will make you know if you play the same piece many times, then it's going to be hard for to achieve the result of differentiation.
That is very interesting. Thank you for sharing your.
Because you know, like I always talk with, you know, I talk with you guys and I talk with, you know, like Xing and, right? So like you guys sometimes make fun of me because, you know, I can't tell like two musicians like apart. Like I can't tell small
I don't think
differences.
I made fun of
No,
you.
I mean
So,
it's just friendly jokes, right? I think it's all fine. It's like you know, you guys are obviously too good to, but you know like but you just know that you know like the for even for me who have been hang out with you guys for a long time, a lot of things I cannot tell. I cannot tell the difference. I can know what's a really good concert, but sometimes you know the small differences may be hard to keep track and maybe hard to be recognized.
mhm. That part obviously needs, you know, education, and unfortunately, in our society, people, or let's say in schools, people always prioritize science over art, and I think, you know, this is something obviously, you know, we can work on it. Um, the other thing, would you mind maybe